All right. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much to all of you who joined us today uh, for a really short notice. But this is a session which we've been wanting to do for a really long time, and we are super excited to have these two really amazing people with us, really esteemed guests, and we'll be talking about something which has been on our minds for a really long time. As creative professionals, our work that we do, we do not create things just in vacuum. It exists in a space. It exists in the space which is political, which is also exists in a space which is in the legal domain. And like any other profession, there are certain laws, there are certain legalities around that work that we create. Now, often what happens, we as artists, we do not like to get into the or nitty gritties of law and everything. Because we like to create and everything, and we just want to put our work out there. But we just realize, there are certain things that it's important for us to sort of like educate us about, just to understand what are the legal provisions that are there, and what are the legal resources that are there for artists that we can reach out to, so that we can safeguard ourselves and the work that we create. And we can also safeguard, be conscious about like the uh, specifics about law that exists in the domain that we put our work in. Um, we will be having a super intensive chat, and we have these two amazing people with us. So let me introduce them without any further ado. We have with us Manoknya Yeluri, who is a entertainment, IP, and artist rights lawyer. She runs this legal consultancy platform called Artistic License. And we are super excited to have her with us, because that is such a niche, that we have hardly come across people practicing this kind of a law in India, which is specifically directed towards artists and creative people. And there is so much that needs to be done in that field, and so much that we need from, from lawyers like them in this field, because there is such a less of a support system or support body, for creators. And we are super excited to have her with us. And of course, the person who told us about her in the first place during Gap Talks, and that is Rohan Chakravarti, aka Green Humor. He needs no introduction. We all love his work. So over to you guys. Manoknya, did I do a good job in introducing you?
You
Did I
did,
get
you
everything
did.
right?
Absolutely, you did. Absolutely. I think I really appreciate the invitation to actually be here and be a part of this discussion, because I think um, what you sort of said initially makes perfect sense. There is often, when it comes to creativity and sort of the business of creativity, or not even necessarily the business, but almost anything that's associated with creativity, we automatically assume that there is a lot of joy and mirth and well, on the other end, of course, a lot of a range of sort of struggles and emotions. But very rarely do we take an active role in understanding that we are very responsible for the kind of work that we put out, and that we can actually protect ourselves, and that there's an entire discourse attached to that. So, and I actually think Rohan is actually an artist who takes accountability very seriously, both for himself and, of course, through the messages that he's amplifying. So, yeah, I mean, this is my careful segue into Rohan, sort of letting us know whether this seems like the kind of subject that needs to be discussed at the moment or not.
Oh, absolutely. I want to thank GAP first of all for choosing to tackle this issue, and for and to Manojna for joining this, because I cannot emphasize enough on how important a portfolio like Manojna's is in today's world for artists, especially in our country. Just to give you an example, I had a copyright infringements issue which I was trying to pursue legally. The first lawyer I consulted, I told him about my portfolio, series that deals with wildlife cartoons. And the next thing I hear, like Mowgli, so it's extremely difficult to have artistic conversations with lawyers, and somebody like Manoj now, who's extremely well versed with the world of art, who understands, not just the various spheres of art, but also the nuances in each one of them. It's really important for somebody like her to be well versed with this, and to take a keen interest in matters of art. So yeah, it's great to have her here, and it's great to be a part of this session.
Thank you so much, guys, and thank you for taking your time out from your busy schedules to be a part of this and engage in this conversation, which we feel is super necessary, especially in the times that we are in today, to educate ourselves and make us aware about uh, the kind of politics and the legal provisions that exist around us. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the host for today's evening, our very own Dapun Raidevan, who is a brilliant artist, animator, illustrator, and comic artist at the same time. And we have been in talks to do this thing for a really long time, but thanks to Dapun and Rohan and Manognia's efforts, like, we are here today. So without further ado, over to you, Dapun. Why don't you take it forward?
Yeah, thank
And
you so much. Thank you so much, Abhishek, and welcome you all. Welcome the speakers, Manognya and Rohan. Just before we get started with the session, I would just like to reiterate that just like to point out that this is going to be a Zoom session, as well as we are live on YouTube simultaneously. So if you have any questions, you can type them out on the in the comment section of Zoom as well as YouTube. Uh, if the opportunity arises, we will definitely ask you to unmute yourselves and show your video as well. But for now, we would like you to type all of your questions in the comments. Yeah. So okay, welcome Rohan and welcome Manognya. Quite a tricky subject this is, isn't it?
A little bit, yes, to say the least.
Okay.
Which is
So
why
like,
I let Manojna do
yeah.
most of the talking, and I'm very happy playing Robin to Manojna's
It's just,
Batman.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that goes.
We'll see how that goes. Yeah. So like Abhishek rightly said, that artists have this innate desire to to use their freedom of expression, to use their creativity to sort of mobilize people, to sort of dissent against any kind of oppression, or even just just talk about whatever he or she would like to. But often, like, at least recently, we've seen a lot of artists coming under fire because of that. A recent case happened when one of our friends, we'll just call her Sanitary Panels. We will not take her name. So so she has been not exactly charged with contempt of court, but she has been, like, given the attorney general has given the consent for the court to start the proceedings for contempt of court. So in another case, there were a couple of artists in Guwahati. They were painting a mural, on Akhil Gogoi, and they were arrested right on spot. And I think this has been going on for quite some time, because there are a lot of other examples, like there was on Asim Trivedi. I remember, like, even he was arrested and all that.
Yep.
So we had been brought up, learning about the right to freedom of expression, learning about freedom of speech as free speech. So my first question to you would be, like, what is free speech, if you could just define it for us?
Oh wow, that's like, I think that's the issue. It's exactly that. I think it's trying to sort of define that, and it's very interesting because I think at the onset of this, I think I do want to sort of I do want to express some qualifications as well to a discussion like this, because um, I think that it does deal with certain sensitive nuances. So it's always good to sort of go in knowing, having certain assumptions in place. So of course, one very, very basic thing is, while I really appreciate this conversation happening, and I, of course, as you mentioned, I think we all welcome questions and comments, and we're going to do our best to try and address them. But at the same time, I think something that a lot of people, creative or otherwise, need to understand is that when you find yourself in a position, whether it's a position of socioeconomic risk, whether it's a position of plagiarism, whether it's a position of socio-political risk, basically whatever sort of tricky situation you find yourself in, I think it's also very important to understand that there's only so much DIYing of a solution you can do. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that even this discussion, I think this discussion serves as a primer, but if someone is genuinely facing a problem, whatever the nature of that problem is, I use that word very loosely, I think it's important to understand that you must seek the proper legal counsel. Like, this doesn't substitute for proper legal counsel. And I think it's very important because, a lot of people, unfortunately, that sort of, that creates confusion, and I think confusion is a good word for me to use with respect to understanding free speech and the right to free speech as well. So I'm essentially, I don't practice or I don't necessarily focus on areas related to criminal law or constitutional law. As you guys mentioned in your introduction very kindly, I do actually work with a lot of artists. I do work largely with independent creators. So that finds me in a position where I'm engaging with people who create original work. And there's no limitation per se to the kind of mediums and disciplines that I sort of engage with, through the people that I work with. So from that perspective, the right to free speech and expression is an incredibly broad. It's an incredibly broad right. It's something that's common almost world over. So it's not necessarily something that's located in the Indian context only. It's internationally recognized. It is a fundamental right, because it allows you the opportunity to speak freely, to express freely. And that can take the direction of a creative work, a creative discipline. It could also be, this is what freedom of press is also related to, the idea. So it's all actually on the same spectrum. But it's not an absolute right. So that means that it comes with restrictions, especially in India. And this is very basic constitutional law 101. So I invite everyone to check it out and read further. And if there's somebody out there who's far more educated than I am on the subject, then please reach out to me. I'm always looking to learn. But simple basics, it's not an absolute right. It comes with something which is sort of referred to as reasonable restrictions. And reasonable restrictions are themselves sort of open to further interpretation. The idea is you can freely express, but you should do so in a way that very broadly doesn't incite any kind of chaos, really, so you don't incite any kind of, well, for the lack of a better word right now, dissent.
No, I mean, it's amazing. Sorry, Rohan, you were saying something.
Sorry, what?
Sorry, isn't that the very purpose of art, Manoj? No?
Yes, that was exactly my question.
I think so. I mean, I don't know if it's the very purpose of art, largely because I don't identify as an artist. I do identify as somebody who has very strong creative inclinations, which is why I find myself in the position that I'm in right now. But actually, that is interesting that you mentioned that, Rohan. I would think that this is the purpose of art. But would you say that this is the sole purpose of art? Like, what, in your opinion, actually is the purpose of art? And Dapun, I'm sorry for hijacking your questions.
No, I'm absolutely glad that you're having this conversation. It's yeah, please, Rohan, please go ahead.
So with your permission, Manoj and Dapun, I'd like to quote one of my favorite cartoonists. She's a Venezuelan cartoonist, currently in exile in the US. Her name is Raima Soprani. And she said something in a fabulous TED talk that really won my heart. She says, cartooning is a barometer for freedom. And that pretty much sums up today's discussion and why we are having this discussion in the first place. And it also throws light on the fact that creative freedom, there is a universal crackdown on creative freedom. It's not just in India that we are facing this, and it's been happening for decades in various ways and means. So yeah, I'm not very well versed with the technical aspects or the legal aspects of this discussion. So my job as an artist, I guess, is to keep the romance alive in our session this evening.
Exactly, and also like I would just like to point out that art, comedy, satire, it's very subjective, right? I mean, like, what offends you might not offend me. What offends me might not offend you. So this I don't find offensive, so I'll make a cartoon of this. You might find that offensive, but you don't find something else offensive that you might make a cartoon on. So everybody has their sort of, what do you call that, their limits, or, or the sensitive bits. So where do you exactly, like today's session's name is, draw the line, I came up with it, by the way. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, well done. Well done.
I love the
Yeah.
title panel that you do.
Yeah, wait. I mean,
Thank you.
if it doesn't have a pun, is it a title at all? So
Oh, yes.
yeah.
They don't call me Dapan for nothing,
Oh.
Sorry.
God. Okay. Okay. I'm going to take a second to process from that pun. But Rohan, would you like to respond to that actually?
See, as far as drawing line is concerned, I have a very simple answer to that. If you are a 70, 80-year-old attorney general, or a 70-year-old prime minister, you should know how to take a joke like an adult. That's all I've got to say.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And what's your, yeah.
So I think it's interesting because I don't mean to, I mean, I must clarify that at this point, I am very much, I work with artists, and I am very much a creative first lawyer. And I guess artistic licenses very much evolved into that, both intentionally and organically. But despite that, I do think that the inherent issue that we face is exactly this. When we do have when you take a very specific side, it's easy to sort of resort to the extremes, and I think the problem with understanding free speech and expression is very much based on what Rohan mentioned, which is context in a sense, and I think that's the issue, like, because it's interesting what is sort of the subject of criticism. And that can change the nature of whether or not something is considered satirical in nature, or whether it's considered, like blasphemy of some kind.
Or just pure hatred, pure anger.
Absolutely. And that's
issues.
the thing. I feel like a lot of the time, I think that this is an issue that we see a lot. The law often doesn't catch up fast enough with, at least this, I can say this about, creativity per se. I often find that the law isn't catching up fast enough with the sort of the evolution of art and artistic expression and creative expression. And so as a result, we are often stuck with these sort of archaic understandings, and whether or not they correspond to a particular situation. That can sometimes be very encouraging of artists, that can also be very discouraging. But I think the deeper issue is that the deeper problem is that we don't have a very dynamic understanding of what we're allowed to talk about and not talk about, and it's very muddled. And from that muddling, nobody wants to take the time to actually unpack it. So then, as a result, you have pure chaos. Actually, that's sort of that. But I wonder if I've actually been able to respond properly to what you.
It's no, what you, a lot of what you say does make sense. Like, I feel like a lot of times, because we do not know the legal side of it, the legal repercussions of it, so sometimes we just self-censor ourselves. We fear, like, maybe we shouldn't say this much, and then only to know that our fears were unfounded. Like, we did not have to worry about it at all, if only we knew the law.
Absolutely.
So yeah, what is your comment on that? Like, I think it's important. How important
Absolutely.
is it to, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that first and foremost, it's really, really important. And I know that it's a bit of a lofty ask, but I don't think that it's an impossible one. But I think especially as artists, as folks working in the creative economy or the creative landscape as such, it's very, very important that we understand the rights that we have at our disposal, not just as artists, but even very much related to the kind of work that one is engaged in. So for example, if you're somebody that's working in, say, the music industry, you ought to know how to navigate that. Maybe you just need to have a basic understanding, and then an understanding of who to go to if you need if you need more sort of counsel or advice or mentorship. And I think the same goes as well with artists who sort of deal with issues of issues of dissent, issues of protest. If essentially people and artists who might identify as activists, or activists who identify as artists, because it's very interesting. That's a very interesting trajectory to see, that there are, and lately I've been having a lot of conversations with activists who find themselves more comfortable identifying as activists, where art is merely the medium through which they convey their
Correct.
message.
Correct. Correct.
So
Correct.
it's an interesting balance, because there the art, is sort of, it's on the lower rung, and
Correct. Correct.
all of this should help inform you of your rights. But one thing that I did want to actually mention is, while it's very important to know your rights and to understand the legal implications, I think another thing that doesn't get acknowledged enough is that it's not just state actors. You get a lot of, you have a lot of self-censorship that's brought on because of several other socio-economic, socio-political factors, like, like the community that you find yourself in, or that maybe you're making a comment on, or inadvertently, impacting in some manner, And a lot of that, when you think about it, not all of it is necessarily coming from, a state actor or the government. Maybe they turn the other way. That's also a conversation to have. But I feel like this is also important to consider, because we shouldn't we shouldn't be blindsided by the fact that we're looking out only for, like, sort of criticism from one side, while sort of quietly encouraging or even quietly ignoring, just not knowing what's happening behind. Because a lot of this is very difficult. I think that when you choose to talk about certain subjects, you have to come prepared, and you have to always be prepared, and you need to prepare others also.
Oh
It's
yeah,
part of the fight.
that's actually a very good point. Manogna, that you need to also back up yourself on what you're making, the kind of content you're creating. You need to have, I often also see a lot of artists who just vent out anger just out of sheer
Right.
frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like they've been so hurt, and you can actually see the anger seeping through the art content. But also, like if I were to talk about, say, the sanitary panels case, I would
Mhm.
say that I think it was more of the content that offended the attorney general rather than the cartoon itself. So even if he were to just write it as a post, I think it would have still garnered the same reaction. Like, would you say so?
I mean, it's interesting, and I really want to. I'd really be curious to hear what Rohan has to say also on this. But it's
Yeah,
very interesting for me to see you make a distinction between the content and sort of the visual aspect of it, because I feel like, eh, I mean, like you mentioned, would it be different had it been in a written format? That is the question, and that is exactly what's left to interpretation. But I think that that's the larger question also, right? Like Rohan mentioned, censorship, self-censorship, the idea that there will be pushback on those who seek to use art, or any form of expression as a vehicle for dissent. That is a very, very old. That's an old one. One that we've seen in
correct.
different avatars over the years, and I think one that we see a lot anyway in journalism and sort of in the written word, so to say. So I think that would be. I mean, it's interesting for me to know um, how you as an artist actually, Rohan, feel about this. Like, do you actually feel that there is a distinction? And I don't know if I'm sort of alluding to something, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, would
Arun,
love to hear Rowan's point of view.
I think there is a distinction because when see that's the whole power of the visual medium. It just enhances what you're presenting, and satire is something that is heavily dependent on visuals, right? At least in my opinion, and it becomes all the more effective when it almost becomes like a slap on your face when you have a visual that is depicting you to in the context of the criticism presented. Now, having said that, I'm also see, I may disagree with the way it has been presented in the particular cartoon we are referring to, or in other cartoons that have been banned historically, right? In 2012, we had Asim Trivedi. I'm a fan of a little more tact in cartoons, in political cartoons, and I think that they should be issues like politics should be dealt a little more tactfully. But having said that, a ban is just not called for. A ban on creative freedom just simply reflects the immaturity of a readership or a bunch of citizens.
Correct. Or an arrest for that matter, or an arrest, or
Exactly. Yeah.
like yeah.
I actually think it speaks to something larger than immaturity, right? I mean, it does actually speak to violations of your, basic fundamental freedom and your basic human rights. It's a spectrum. So I think that's where things get a bit tricky. And a lot of it is dependent also on societal perception, right? Like, for example, we believe very earnestly in the value and sort of the impact of art, but there are a lot of people who don't necessarily feel that way. To some people, a cartoon is just a cartoon. But to some
Exactly.
people, a cartoon is a means to amplify a message,
It is
and that
subjective,
doesn't
but
even
like I said,
100%, 100%.
yeah.
And I feel like that's also challenging, right? Like, for example, the wall murals that you were sort of speaking about, and the detention that actually took place, right? um I think it's interesting when action is taken against a piece of work, or an expression, because it hints at larger underlying issues, right? It hints at the fact that someone is genuinely worried that this is going to plant the seed, or this is part of, sort of like a larger movement to create just an opposing force, right? So there's a lot of
Chaos.
dissent on the internet. God bless the internet for, like, making everything accessible.
Yes, yes.
So it can get a little tricky then. So why is it that there are only certain things that are used as, why is it that only certain things feel offensive? Is it merely the content, or is it also about setting an example? So all things
Can
to
I quickly
consider.
butt in and ask a question since we are on the
Yes, please do.
topic? Since Rohan also mentioned about satire. So, in when it comes to like you said, like freedom of speech, there is reasonable restrictions there, right? You cannot say something say, which can say hurt a
Incite violence
community,
or
incite
hurt opinion.
violence,
Yeah.
or like hate speech, right? And like Dapun also said, but then again, there's always going to be something that someone is always going to take offense to. So in the context of say comedy or satire, that we have this concept of punching up, you can make fun of the man above, but say you do not make fun of someone who is less privileged than you, right? Like, if I put out something which is offensive to say at the LGBTQ plus community, or say if it's offensive to a minority community, then it's not cool, right? Then a little bit of self censorship is good.
Hmm.
But just say if we are talking about say a powerful regime, or like a ethnically superior group which is trying to sort of like oppress another group, which is sort of like minority or less privileged than they, um, in comedy and all, that is considered okay. So in law, is there something which pertains to like a similar concept of like punching up, like punching up is okay, punching down is not okay?
Right. That's a very interesting, I guess, perspective on this. So I don't think that, I mean, when you think about it, right, like when you're looking at provisions related to things like defamation, for instance, right? And I can't speak too much to it because I don't necessarily engage with it, especially criminal defamation. I don't engage with it, but I definitely know of, based on conversations that I have had, and what I'm sort of learning as well. I personally haven't really found a lot of acknowledgement. I don't even know how a concept like punching up, so to say, like, I'm not sure how applicable it would be in the legal context, because it goes back to figuring out who is up and who is down, and sort of understanding like what is considered privilege and what isn't. And while of course there are of course accepted things, right? Like, you don't speak about certain subjects related to exactly that, like minority groups, for instance. But I don't think it's as simple as that, and I think that that's the problem with it's also a question of when you're, when you're pursuing comedy or satire, are you doing it to amplify a message, or are you doing it to get attention? And there's a big difference between the two, because that spells the difference between, whether what you're saying actually has some kind of truth behind it, and whether it can actually be used as a means to, go after, pursue some kind of change. Or if not, then, you're just sort of ranting, and, you're making sort of a scene about
But
something.
but would you say that it could inspire somebody, or agitate somebody to actually hold you in contempt? Say, for example, contempt of court.
Mhm.
Would you say that, like, does it ever qualify for that, or like does it, because that's like going all the way extreme, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
to be fair, see, I can't say obviously for all situations, because can't foresee all of them at this point. But I will definitely say this much. I'm not sure how this was justified. What was sort of what
Or could you
sanitary
just
panels
just
had to
just
go through.
yeah, could you
I
just tell
I
us
I
like what contempt of court is? Like, what is it?
Right, of course, of course,
Uh,
of course. So very, very simplistically, you can basically, contempt of court is very much like, in the name itself. And the idea basically is, there's sort of like a civil contempt of court, and then there's criminal contempt of court. And civil is basically when you disobey a court order, and, like, something has sort of been asked of you, there's a decree and you didn't show up, or you didn't do it. And, it's the milder. The criminal one is really sort of where you scandalize, or interfere with, like, proceedings of the court, or basically anything that's like the establishment. And that's the problem, right? Like, who's to know what scandalizing means? And that's the basic criticism that people have against contempt of court. But that's also the basic criticism that a lot of people have when it comes to art, in the context of whether or not it's, whether it's having like a restrictive effect on freedom of speech and expression. So one person's scandalizedness, that's not a word, but anyway, is scandal. That's the word. One person's scandal, doesn't necessarily have to translate into everybody else's. And that's where the subjectivity comes, right? And
yeah, I
that's
mean,
exactly what I mean, that that's the stuff that's not dynamic. So in the current context, I mean, I do feel like I want to sort of clarify my personal opinion, but I do feel that what happened, that I don't think that there was anything that warranted, I don't think that that action against sanitary panels was warranted, because I didn't understand. I'm 100%, I'm not alone. And this is not a comment on the aesthetics of it, or the artistic value of it, or the artist herself. This has nothing to do with any of that. It was commentary in a country where a lot of stuff is being commented on, and where a lot of stuff is going haywire. So,
exactly.
it is, yeah. But this is my personal opinion at the end of the day. And I'm not a part of the judiciary. So,
Manoj, now you know the world
Yes.
of lawyers, so I was just wondering if this is like a new way of for young lawyers to, special language.
it's so funny. The reason I laugh is, of course, we were speaking about this recently, but this is also a conversation that I've been having with, sort of within my little fraternity, within my little alumni groups as well. So it's really funny that you mentioned this. I think back in law school as well, I would remember that it was sort of like a running joke. But it's like, if you wanted to make it as, as a law student, and mind you, I mean, law students, please take this with the necessary amount of salt. But I feel like there was this running joke that, if you wanted to become, you wanted to stand out, you you file a public interest litigation against someone. You find yourself in a footnote somewhere. Somebody versus somebody. Uh, Something along those lines. And it's interesting that you mentioned this, because a few people believe that this is kind of a way to get attention. I can't speak to that again as a blanket rule, because see, that's also discouraging of some young law students out there, or some young legal professionals out there, who honestly might have
Right.
the fortitude to stand up against a system that maybe we can't. So I definitely don't want to discourage people
Right.
from this. But I will say, and this is true for myself as much as it's true for anyone, I think it's very important to do your homework and to be clear why you're doing something, you know. But that's the thing, right? Like, people have vested interests, like, and fame is, God bless social media, fame is, you know, a massive vested interest for a lot of people. Yeah.
Varun, I just want to revert to Abhishek's question because this is also pertinent.
Yeah.
There was a recent case of a children's book done by my friend, shouldn't name her here, done by my friend, and the illustrations in the children's book seem to offend a particular minority community. And just by means of, people ganging up and bullying, the publisher had to take the book down. So, what protection can an artist have in such a scenario?
That's a super, super tricky one. And again, I say it's tricky because, see, the pressure didn't come from an establishment, right? The pressures come from community, right? How do you control community? I mean, I know that this isn't the same. I know that this is a discussion where we focus largely on cartoons and possibly by extension, you know, related mediums. But I do also feel like it's worth bringing up things like, you know, the Ekatvam ad, and why people just freaked out about it, you know, to the point to which I believe Tanishq stores were being attacked. Managers were requested to put up apologies on their windows. That, you know, the ad was pulled down from television. And it's interesting, right? Because it was community. It was people who pressured the
Right.
withdrawal of that, right? Which is also interesting because it's, if you play it right, it means people have a lot of power. So it is an interesting thing. But coming back to how you protect yourself, I think, unfortunately, that while an artist can do as much due diligence as they can, um, and there is a lot of due diligence that can be done, sometimes things slip through the crack, you know. And when they slip through the cracks, you do have to be prepared. I think in a situation like this, it's good to have a conversation with the publisher and understand why the publisher took it down. And artist to publisher, I would say that if the publisher's only justification is, I took it down because of, you know, because of pressure and not because of any other kind of institutional reason, then I think it merits having a conversation between the publisher and the writer or the artist or the creator, and maybe even exploring some kind of compensation there, because this is now a loss of revenue for the creator, you know. And this is, and why, when you work with a publisher, when you work with a label, when you work with anybody who takes on the responsibility of distributing your work, right, there is this idea that that person is going to make the best decisions for you. So if they're not making the best decisions for you, I think that that's something on an individual level that a lot of artists need to feel empowered about. It's okay to ask. You know, you shouldn't, just because you've signed something doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask. You 100% should ask. It's okay to feel like you didn't understand the first time or even the second time, because chances are people kind of like to think that they have all the answers, and they make it look like it. But a lot of the time, publishers and the like, they've never been challenged. They go completely unchallenged. So I don't know, was that sort of in line with what you were sort of talking about, Rohan?
Yes, I mean on multiple fronts. The publisher is one front, the members of the community who are offended is another. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
thanks.
yeah,
So, taking forward Rohan's question, like you said, it is an entire community which is sort of taking offense,
hmm,
and unfortunately, there is a lot of that happening right now. In terms of, there is actually more of that. You can't be sure of, what is the vested interest behind it or whatever, but there is a lot of that, what we call trolling today,
hmm,
and a lot of artists, creators of any field, like we saw with the Tanish cat. Then I think there was this entire week on Twitter when something or the other was trending, that boycott this on Twitter,
yeah,
boycott this, boycott that.
yeah,
So in situations like this, right, is there some kind of provision or anything that creators can do to sort of protect themselves from such kind of online harassment and bullying? Because so far we just know, okay, every social media platform has its own thing, okay,
yeah,
you can report abuse, and almost half the time they are more offended by females' nipples than a person talking about,
Yeah.
communal violence and hatred. Like most often, I would just get like, okay, this does not go against the community standards. Thank you for reaching out. So, like, what is a substantial way that we can sort of safeguard ourselves, and you know, uh, protect us in scenarios like this from trolls and yeah, online trolls and stuff. And Rohan, please, you also chime in, because I believe you also might have some insight into this matter.
Absolutely. I think, I mean, I'm just going to touch on this, and then I really do want Rohan to sort of to speak about this, because I think it's very important that we hear it um, from an artist and from a creator like Rohan, who it's unfortunate that this is that one has to sort of endure this kind of behavior, for the lack of a better word at this point, on a daily basis, and that it goes unchecked, and it's just completely unwarranted a lot of the times. But I think, I'm actually happy to sort of like maybe share a few resources. But the interesting thing is that you do actually, if you take it seriously enough, right, and you sort of find what you mentioned, right, like it is harassment, and it is bullying, right? And the thing is, there are actually legal instruments and legal provisions that necessarily deal with this. But then the question comes up, how do you sort of approach it? This is kind of the long-winded way of saying that it's always good to have accessibility to appropriate legal counsel, because they will guide you in the best possible way. I kind of want to do a little bit of a plug-in for a friend of mine who also does a lot of work in the space, but she's also very social media savvy. So this is Avantika from the ladies compartment. Yes, I think that's what it is. I'm a huge fan, and then I forget the name. But she often actually shares resources and material that's very, very, I think, relevant to folks who have to deal with trolling. And it's an interesting conversation piece, because she always sort of she has a law background herself, and she comes to the conversation saying that you can actually seek redressal, and you can actually, there are ways. You don't just have to sit back and report abuse. You can actually take it to the proper authorities. Now, I can't guarantee that things are going to be taken seriously, et cetera, because it's like layers and layers and layers to this. But I think that there's a lot of merit in approaching this as, you would a criminal case, because that's kind of what it is at the end of the day, right? And if it's going to, a lot of these threats, they become threats, they pose threats to your life, to your well-being, to the well-being of your dear ones. And it's very, very, there are legislations. I won't promise that these legislations are also perfect. For instance, right now in a lot of countries, we're seeing that there are a lot of digital security acts, that are provisions out of that act are sort of very, very happily misused by the governments to go ahead and imprison or, illegally, unlawfully detain artists and creators, because they believe that their work is somehow going to incite, some kind of violence or disruption, etc., etc. So it is convoluted, but there are options. And I would just say it's very important to go beyond, like, report abuse. And like, don't just call out your abusers. All of that is fair, I think. I think it is fair game, but there is like a next level to it. But I really want to hear Rohan's take on this, because I'm always looking at this from the outside in, but I suspect Rohan has a very different perspective on this, or maybe a similar one. I don't know.
No, so I am somebody who's affected by trolling a lot. You put in hours of research, hours of hard work, get a cartoon out. In my case, it's usually first in the print media, where a lot of meaningful interactions happen with readers, because they write letters to you, they write emails to you, they actually take the trouble of analyzing your work.
Yeah.
Social media, my friend, is a different ball game. You put in hours of research, you put in hours of hard work. One random dude comes and types bullshit.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
social media is all about.
Yeah.
So yeah, but having said that, Dapun and Manojna, I have the privilege of being male, and men have it a lot easier. Let me tell you this:
True.
men have it a lot easier. I've been following so many accounts of female artists, and the kind of trolling that they go through, the kind of harassment that they go through, is another level. So yeah, I mean, I really wish that there was, a more patterned and structured way to actually go after these trolls, and anybody who issues even an informal threat to your life or your a threat to your well-being. I hope there was a more structured way of going after these people and seeing these kind of cases through.
And in fact,
Absolutely.
I think this is one thing that we artists also get exhausted and tired of. Like we probably had this, I don't know how unfounded or, how real it is, that lawyers are probably expensive, or, like we have to go through this entire exhausting process of, there's all this law procedures and, so it's like never ending. The movie mein dikhate hain, Tariq pe Tariq and all that, So, how justified are these, or are there like options to where we can actually, other resources like where which are accepted, what do you call that, in within easy reach of us, where we do, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I think you're touching on something that's incredibly important, because I find that a lot of the times people do, and I suppose rightly so, people do have some very different preconceived notions, even misconceptions, I would say, about accessing legal counsel. Now, to address your first question, the economics of it, like, is sort of legal counsel expensive? It can be, it can be. And it's connected to the second thing, which is like it's so procedural. It is procedural because you are attempting to do something rather significant and serious at the end of the day. If it was simple, it would just be the click of a button. I am not taking away from the fact that there are a lot of people that there are a lot of people out there who are very consciously attempting to simplify processes. There are a lot of people who are trying to explore alternatives that take you outside of a courtroom. So there are alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. There's a lot of interesting work that's being done there. But having said that, I think to make the choice of doing something very deliberate, of deliberately taking legal action, you do have to, it will be a process, and you must sign up for it, and you must be ready to see it through, basically. So it's not going to be, it's definitely not going to be easy peasy, lemon squeezy. That's definitely there. But coming back to this and about resources, I think something that I definitely want to touch on, because it's something that I'm currently learning a lot more about. So I have, I'm one of the reasons I genuinely enjoy the work that I do is because it's very nourishing to me, because I have the opportunity to learn from a lot of interesting folks that I think I wouldn't have ordinarily have had the opportunity to engage with. I get to have a lot of conversations with them. I get to learn a lot about the work that they're doing. I have a very different perspective, and I'm eternally grateful for that. I don't take that, I think it's a privilege, and I don't take that privilege lightly at all. And sort of in the course of that, as much as I work on copyright related issues and sort of transactional commercial issues, I've always been very interested also in understanding, I guess, human rights related issues of artistic freedom and creative freedom, freedom of speech and expression, because I don't necessarily view these things as separate. I think that one seamlessly flows into the other. The right to express and the right to have a livelihood, these are all related, in my opinion. So for me personally, and I think this is true for a lot of people, I think it's very insightful to understand it as like a seamless thing. You need to understand one to understand better the other, and then go back, etc., etc. So there are a lot of resources out there, and I've been fortunate enough to start consulting with a lovely program that's actually based out of New York, but they have a global footprint, and they're called Artists at Risk Connection. They are a project of PEN America. And PEN America is basically an organization that has been dedicated to understanding how best to protect freedom of speech and expression, largely for writers and those engaged in the written word and journalists. Artists at Risk Protection, or ARC, is essentially an extension of that program, acknowledging the fact that creative freedom also deserves that kind of support. And as a part of that work, as a part of that exploration, and being able to work with several other outfits, like I've been fortunate enough to engage with people working with the UNESCO and several other programs. Lots of resources out there that I think go untapped because artists often believe that they live in a vacuum, like what's happening to me is not happening to anyone else, and like only I will understand, and only like these 3 4 people will understand. So there are, and the same thing happens with human rights organizations. They consider violations of free speech and expression, but because they're not necessarily familiar with what's happening in a medium, like Rohan mentioned, I mean, I don't know how many human rights organizations would necessarily put an illustrator or somebody who does cartoons on wildlife and ecology. I don't know how many of them would actually put it on their radar to check out whether there are freedom of speech and expression violations here, whether the trolling amounts to some, whether there's hate speech. But that's the connection that needs to be made. And there are resources out there, like there are a lot of different organizations that offer financial aid to people who find themselves in positions of risk. So you can apply to these organizations, and they might be able to support you in your legal trial. They might help you find a lawyer. They might help.
So you're saying, so me, I'm in Guwahati.
Yeah.
I'm in this small little town in Guwahati in the northeast of India. So I can approach them directly, and I can ask them for their help, and they will find a lawyer for me. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I'm saying that that's possible, and I'm saying that there are several options. Of course, I can't guarantee anything at this point because see, we're thinking about it only in the perspective of what we know, but there's so much out there that we don't know. So there are a lot of people helping a lot of people, and there are of course a lot of people going unhelped as well. There is that problem also. But I am saying that there are resources out there. I would definitely like to invite people to check out Artists at Risk. Artists at Risk. Oh my God, connection.
It's called Artists at Risk.
It's Artists at Risk Connection .org.
.org.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would definitely invite people to check that out. I would invite people to check out things like Free Muse. Free Muse is a monitoring body that primarily monitors and records violations against artists and creators across disciplines. So Free Muse comes out with a report every year about the state of artistic freedom in the world. UNESCO has programs and reports as well. So the thing is, if you're interested, you have to dig. And then you have to share. I think that that's another thing that's also incredibly important. Like, it's not enough that we find out what we find out and then we sit with it, because how will everybody else know? Like, I think that this is, and honestly, I think this is one of the things that I appreciate through platforms like this, that we have an opportunity to talk about it. At least the conversation starts somewhere. So, yeah.
Manoj, I have a small question for you. If there is to be a kind of a movement or a collective to ensure greater press freedom or greater artistic freedom in India, how does one legally go about it?
Oh, wow. Okay. I think that there would be a lot. I'm not sure if I'm the only, I would definitely not feel fully qualified to address that. But I do think, however, that it is something that it's not as simple as forming an LLP and then going about it largely because of the subject that you're choosing, because you're sort of head on going into this. You're sort of, as you mentioned earlier, tact, right? Tact is a very important thing that can be used for our benefit as well as artists and creators and creative professionals. But it is something that can happen. And I find that there are already a lot of, Rohan, honestly, to be very, very honest, there are two ways to do something like this. I feel one is to definitely start from scratch and build something on our own, because we can go ahead and infuse it with the mission statement and the values that we find integral. But at the same time, I think another way to do it is to also start establishing deeper dialogue with the institutions that are already in place. We should be interacting more with organizations. For example, there is a lovely organization and collective that goes by the name of Mara, that's based out of Bangalore, and they do a lot of work on issues related to, basically socio-economic justice, socio-political justice. And they use art as an integral part, creativity, music, it's an integral part of, the kind of work that they're doing. And organizations like that exist everywhere. There's India Foundation for Arts that makes room for conversations like this. There are programs at the UNESCO. I'm not saying it's easy. I will definitely qualify that. It's not easy, but I think that this is also important. Like, we can start from scratch, or we can start lending our support to a lot of these existing organizations and outfits as well. And vice versa. They also need to be more open. I think that's the thing. I feel like we need more dialogue, honestly, to
Plus, I
understand who
think,
needs what.
yeah. Plus, I think also, like, we don't have to have a union, that protects our rights. An official union. So I guess that's where I think Rohan was also going.
Yeah, like for example, like in every other industry, when you look at it, right? Like, in the film industry or in the medical industry, there's the Indian Medical Association. Then there is the Bollywood Workers Association. I don't know exactly what it's called. So every profession sort of has some kind of a body which is out there, which is, kind of like a "we got your back" sort of a thing, which have whenever there is some kind of out, like, backlash or something, like they sort of form like the lobby, or like a powerful system that will sort of, like, get their back. Like, if it's there's a case slapped against them, they will have the resource, the manpower or whatever, to sort of, like, help this one person. So like you said, like, in India, such a thing, especially directed towards artists, and especially say towards illustrators and visual artists, is not really there, right? Like Mara exists, IFA exists, but they also exist in their own little bubbles. They represent, they work within a certain I don't know, like context. And so I don't know if I'm summarizing it right, but I think what Rohan, or what I am also curious to know, is like, how can we uh, go forward into establishing something which can have the same kind of, provide the same kind of backing to illustrators, artists, visual artists, and anyone who is out there at risk of uh, all these kind of, like, social media trolling, uh, cases against them for, like, dissenting, like, and some things which are like clearly unfair, which are, you can see that it's clearly, like, uncalled for, so that they're not victims of such harassment. So what can be done, what can be the way to go, what can we probably read up and look up, so that we can, like, prepare ourselves and to build a form of collective like this.
Absolutely. I think there is a lot of value in collective representation and collective bargaining. So I don't know if one would prefer to call it a union or a trade union or a collective. And there are subtle nuances, there are subtle differences between all of them. But I think that every sort of it is important for an industry and a set of artists and a creative discipline to have access to some kind of form of collective bargaining, because it can be helpful. But at the same time, who sort of will be the administrative backbone of that collective bargaining, organization, so to say, that is also very important. Because just a few months ago, actually, I had a little online conversation with a lot of good friends and colleagues, I would say, from the music industry. But they were all artists; they're all musicians themselves and managers, of course. And one of them actually brought up a very interesting point. Anisha Kotwani, she runs a management agency called Wavelength. It's not just a management agency, so it's many different things. But she brought up a very interesting point, because unionization and collective bargaining is something I think all creative people, especially independent creative professionals, feel very, very strongly about. But a point that I think she brought up, and which still stays with me, is that it is also something that will work if you have the right kind of people behind it, and the right kind of people who are taking care of it. Because, see, for example, if you want somebody to lobby for you, you will need somebody who's going to be in a position to organize that many disparate thoughts, right? Because that's the problem right now. The problem is that we all feel like I mean, it's very interesting. A lot of artists have a need to express and to put things out there, but are inherently introverted. you know, Inherently sort of happier being on their own, working on their own. And uh, one can argue that there are not enough spaces and opportunities to talk to each other, but one can also argue that, a lot of people don't want to also, I mean, it is just the way it is. And that's the thing, when you put together a collective like this, you also have to have people who are very clear, very responsible, very transparent about why it is, how it is that they want to run something like this. So by all means, I think that starting a collective is good, but then it is a massive commitment. It's not something that you start today and that you sort of hope that it will organically sort of develop into something, because it's going to deal with a lot of significant issues. And the minute people realize that they have a platform that's going to represent them, people have a lot of things that they want to get out their chest, and then you have to consider there's business related conversations, there's conversations of representation. As a collective, will you pool money together, and seek legal aid? And the thing is, as I'm saying this, it doesn't sound impossible, but it does take time. And I think that if we're willing to put in the time, then we should most certainly put something together, and then that can sort of get connected to other existing, institutions. Because I often say this, so I'm going to say it again, which is that I think we're independent, not isolated. So I really think that we have to sort of remember that. We always have to remember that there is an opportunity for connection, but it will take time and effort. It's something it's an investment, but it is possible.
Well, can I just ask one question or make an observation?
Yes, Sangeeta,
hi.
go ahead.
Yeah. I think the problem is also that we're looking at this collective or your union that you speak of as one single entity. The problem is, if you look at it as one single entity, it's not going to be possible.
Nope.
It has to happen organically. It has to happen in pockets, like any kind of revolution or any kind of initiative or movement has, right? Or am I just talking off the top of my head right now?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think what we can see right now, especially like the biggest movement that is happening in the country right now, it is not like one farm body or not one workers union which is protesting, right? It is a group of workers unions from around the country, group of farmers unions from around the country. So I think that's a very important point to bring about that. It has to start with smaller steps. And I think it will take like a few initiators, to begin this process, and probably like, set up chapters in different states, or like, just or connect with existing bodies which are already probably doing similar work.
Absolutely.
And it's just, that's the thing, like, we need to sort of like, organize ourselves. I think that
yes, we have to take responsibility. Exactly. I mean, we have to sort of I do agree with Rohan that it is, and I feel like this will be the running theme of several of our conversations, even after this, as it should be, I do think, Sangeeta, I think you do bring up a very, very valid point. I mean, that's the name that I see there. So I hope I'm right.
Yeah, you're right.
But I also do very much support what you're saying, because increasingly with the work that I'm kind of exploring as well, I think that the challenges that that a specific group or a specific community face, only that community can speak to it.
It has to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But it also has to it has to go beyond that. I think that that's the struggle. We have our collective is doing a lot, but then this collective needs to speak to that collective, and that takes time.
A sort of federalization of collectives.
I mean, I guess so. I feel like, see, this is the problem also with terminology. The minute you sort of bring terminology, it can become both confusing, kind of depressing, so it is there. But at the end of the day, I still feel like the only way forward is to talk to each other. The only way forward is to do that. Like, you can't.
I think that's happening because of social media. It's slow.
I do agree. I mean, I feel like something like this would have been impossible, like a few years ago. So, and 2020 has definitely seen a lot more people reaching out. But with it comes, there's a lot. There's a lot of layers again to that. So yeah.
I think
yeah.
it's
Good.
8:06. So this is your
Yeah.
reminder to Manognia. You had to.
Thank you.
You told us to remind you.
Yes.
But can we just take a few quick questions from the audience?
Yeah,
There's
that
one
works.
question
Yeah.
up on the chat box.
Okay. There's a lot of questions. One question which was
wow,
asked by
long
Tanaz is that isn't chaos necessary for change? And which is, I think, relates to the first question, which is that artists create chaos. Artists thrive in chaos. I think some of the best art is created in situations of chaos, in during movements, revolutions, war. I think, and I do believe, art is, if it does not spark some kind of chaos or some kind of, it does not have to be destructive chaos. It can be chaos inside your mind, it can be chaos in your heart. It needs to spark like the some kind of a juices inside your body. I don't know if that's the right terminology.
No, absolutely.
Question.
I
mean, they said that if it doesn't make you uncomfortable, it's not art.
I mean, so I think that's the thing, right? Like, I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I find that I find that bit a bit problematic, but like at the same time, I do definitely believe that, I think it's not just the purpose of art. So this is me getting a bit more broader on this, but I think that it is necessary for us to question the status quo rather than accept it. I think we're indoctrinated into a lot of, like, we're conditioned not to ask too many questions, and then we're conditioned to look down on people who ask a lot of questions. And I feel like that's changing in many different ways. But I feel like the role of the artist in that is very powerful. There was a quote that I came across actually earlier this year, which has just found its way into almost everything that I've sort of written overtly and that I write to myself as well, which is that the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And it's by Tony Kate Bambara. And it's true, right? At the end of the day, like it's a vehicle for community. It's so much. It's so immersive. So yeah, of course. So chaos is necessary, but then I think it's also upon us to be accountable for the consequences of what we're doing. If you want to create a disruption, then you must, and this goes back to protecting ourselves also as artists and creative people. If you're going into a protest situation, you must know your rights.
And it's this
So here's my next question. I think it again connects to what Rohan had said. So Rohan had said,
can I just substantiate that with an example, a very pertinent example. I don't know, but Borat 2 is a very popular film, and I don't know how many of you would have watched it. A lot of
very
people
nice.
agree with it. Okay.
Very nice.
For somebody like me who deals with comedy, that is the highest pinnacle of comedy. Why? Because Borat managed to offend all kinds of people, right?
I feel like that's why he timed it.
Everybody, and it achieved a much larger goal: affect the US elections, right? I mean, that is the pinnacle of comedy to me. So, just to substantiate what Manojna said with a practical example that everybody is aware of.
So this
Rohan,
brings to my next question to Rohan. Like you had mentioned about, like, you appreciate a certain amount of tact in artists, in art, and keeping that thing in mind, like, how do you think artists, because everyone is not Sacha Baron Cohen, right? Like that is like one genius who comes once in a century sort of a thing. But like, how can artists dissent smartly? How can they sort of like, be more tactful? Like
or
one of the simplest examples I can say, like, not taking, say, direct names, maybe being subtle, because ultimately we are creative people, we work in a visual medium, so a lot can be said through just pictures. So according to you, like, how do you think people can be more tactful, can dissent smartly through their art?
And also, if I can just pile on to that question, like you mentioned, Borat had the capacity to shake up the U.S. elections. So that is America, right? So I think the freedom of speech and all that is practiced very differently there, and right, as opposed to here. So, like, even though we've grown up learning about freedom of expression and speech, do you think it's practical even here, like even to even practice that freedom? Because, taking into consideration the amount of repercussions, we have to go through. So what's your take on that?
So actually, Dapun, this is a conversation that has been happening in a very large way even before US made Borat or other radical films. It has been happening in the Indian art house sector for a very long time. So if you watch the films of Govind Nihalani, there's just one example. Some of his films speak about artistic freedom and the role of artists in political protest. So this is a conversation that India has been leading. At least the creative side of India has been leading for a very long time now. But for some reason, authorities have managed to suppress or subdue it. To answer Abhishek's question, I'll speak about my own art form because that's what I know best. So R.K. Lakshman, described cartoons as a reflection of the country's mood on a particular day. And I think that is what, according to me, a cartoonist's job is. It's not to enforce a political opinion on your audience, right? It's not to enforce a personal opinion on your audience. It is to facilitate your audience to build an opinion of themselves by presenting a certain picture in a satirical or a humorous way. And that is where tact lies, in understanding that motive of a cartoon. So if you're bound to present your own personal or political opinions in your art, which is fair, uh, what you've got to do is substantiate it with facts. If that is missing, then I think your art is liable for legal action or boycott. But yeah, I think if you think that you are not tactful enough as an artist, the least you can do is substantiate what you're presenting with a claim, with a fact-based claim.
The fact-based claim is actually very important. I think even a lot of lawyers also back this up by saying that if you're going to take names, make sure that you have your facts right, and you don't just make up cartoons from the rear end of you or whatever. So
I
yeah,
don't think.
yes, Manoj, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that you need to. I don't think we need law to say that, to substantiate that. We should all honestly be doing our homework and saying things after we know exactly what we want to say. I feel like, especially, everyone has an opinion. And I think that the fact that people have a lot of unsubstantiated opinions, how I don't think we should encourage communication which does not have accountability attached to it, because it won't end well. It could be a creative expression. It could be a written expression. It could be just a conversation like this, right? At the end of the day, if there's no accountability attached to it, then what are we trying to establish? Why even say anything? We should just keep quiet.
But you know what? But again, like if I may just correct my own self, saying no, you need to back yourself up with facts. How possible is it anyway? Like how factual are facts anyway, right? So even that's another very how much can you fact check?
I don't think it's about. Well, we should do the best we can. I think that's just what it is, right? See,
with all the fake news going about, I mean.
Yeah, see, I don't mean to sound very idealistic about this, because I'm 100% aware of the limitations of the human condition, and that we can't obviously be sure of everything. But I think it's also incumbent on us to make that extra effort. I feel like, especially thanks to social media, people are very, me included, I think that we all go through these moments where we're very reactive to a piece of news or a piece of, criticism or a piece of information,
right,
rather than actually being responsive. And as much as I might sound a bit like a self-help book at this point, but I do see the difference between the two, and I think that guides us both in conversations related to issues of justice. I think it also relates to conversations related to issues, in our commercial business lives. Like, for example, when the world went on lockdown, some people were just hurtling themselves at the internet to sort of, take advantage of all the mediums out there. And then they were surprised why they were feeling so exhausted, why they were so burnt out, because we reacted. We reacted to the fact that somebody out there said, Acha, now you should go digital, but not acknowledging whether or not that is a pivot that's even necessary for us. And I feel like that's the thing, like we have to also get used to just, I would say there's a difference between waiting and pausing. Like, I think it's a good idea for us to pause, have our sort of, ducks in a row, so to say. So I feel like I said, like, I feel like if you anticipate trouble, I think that you should also start reaching out and finding people and communities and, peer mentors, for instance, that might be of assistance to you should you get into trouble. So don't wait, basically.
So would you know of any such, like resources we could go to, like to fact check stuff? Because I know one called altnews.com.
Of course,
.in, I guess. Yeah. So like, would you know any other such resources, or do?
I mean, I feel like, again, I feel like there are, see, that's the thing, right? Like, I'm not just directly talking about fact checking also, because I'm also very aware of the fact that there are certain pieces of information that don't find their way into mainstream discourse or, any kind of like news. So I think it's just a question really of behaving with a certain degree of accountability. And like I said, like take a moment to understand what it is that you're putting out there. And I think it's very important to a lot of I don't know, maybe this sounds a bit biased, but I think it's very important to a lot of young creators out there who are very, very quick to sort of pull the trigger on something and say, no, this isn't cool. Like, this isn't all right. But why? If somebody asks you and says, but why? Your answer shouldn't be, oh, because this other person said so. Because that's not enough. That's not going to move us forward. That's just going to move us around in circles.
Right. Thank you for that, Manoj. Right. I don't know how well are we doing on time. Would you?
It's 8:18. How much time do you have with us, Manognya?
I'm happy to take maybe another question if that's
okay. Do have one from. We do have one question, right, Abhishek?
Yeah, it's a long one. Do you want to take that?
I think it's. Oh wow, it's quite. I mean, yeah, because I saw the word ethical in there, so let's do it. Yeah, for sure. For sure. But I don't know if this is a question that I would necessarily have to take. I think this might be a question for everyone.
Okay. Yeah. Should Dapan, do you want to read it, or should I?
Okay, sure. I'll read it. So this is by Mayuk, and he says this. The question is more on the behavioral aspect of people as a whole in the house. Also about what is right and what is wrong in this case. If we talk about the bashing between right wing and left wing, on various cases, we see right bashing the left when cases like sanitary panels surface the news, while at the same time we see the left bashing the right when cases like someone's office is broken down or the journalist being arrested. If we look deeper into it, both the wings are imitating the same behavior on various scenarios. What is the ethical approach to view this? Wow, that is.
Oh yeah, I told you the minute ethical comes into the picture, it's going to be a good question.
Yes.
So, Rohan.
Okay. This is scary. Again, I'll give you the example of cartoons, okay, and what I feel about this question. So there was this cartoon floating around during the CAA protests, which showed the Aam Aadmi Party causing the Delhi riots, right? And I disagree with that. I know that it is not a fact-based claim. I know that it is something that is being presented with an uglier political agenda, right? I wouldn't label myself as right wing or left wing, at least not in my work, because I don't think that's a cartoonist job. That's definitely not a cartoonist job to take political sides. But in this case, something outrightly wrong was being presented as a cartoon. Now, again, as a reader of cartoons, I would not call for that to be banned or that to be legally boycotted. It is up to the discretion of a mature readership to try and figure out if what is being presented is wrong or right. But being from the country that we are in, being from the very impulsive and the very charged atmospheres that we live in, that kind of artwork, that kind of irresponsible artwork can have very deleterious effects. Another example is Charlie Hebdo. I think those cartoons were not tactful. They could have been done in much more refined ways. But I really am fond of the vision behind those cartoons. What Chap or what Kabu said when making those cartoons is that we want to make Islam as banal as Christianity, right? And I mean, if that's what your agenda is, that if that's what your mission is with respect to your art form, please go for it. So yeah, I what do you call a centrist? I don't know if that's a fashionable word. A centrist reader, a consumer of cartoons. I wouldn't call for a ban on any of these art forms or any of these presentations. It is up to the maturity of a readership and the discretion of a readership to decide what's wrong and right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I answered the question correctly.
Actually, it was I mean, thank you for that. But I was like, I think Mayur wanted to know more about the scenario where there are like these factual things going on, like there are no misrepresentations of any sort. But it's like one wing. It's like the ball is in your court sometimes, and the ball is in the other court sometimes. But we both imitate each other's situation. Like if the right wing, let's just call it one side and the other side. If the other side says, your neighboring country, or if when the moment the ball is on our court, we can say go to that neighboring country or something like that. I've seen this happen.
Yeah.
So we kind of imitate each other. So we've seen this behavior of imitating each other. So I think that's what I think Mayuk wanted to know. Like, are we like, is it an eye for an eye? कि आज मेरी बारी है तो आज मैं जली ना तेरी जली ना वो सब मीम्स डालना चालू करूंगा और कल तेरी बारी है तो तू डालेगा. So why should we like when if we have the right to dissent or be rant about something and they should keep quiet and just listen to us, why should we retaliate when it's their turn, sort of something like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if I could phrase it correctly, but you get the gist of it.
I feel like this is something that's very important, because I think that especially alluding to the CA protests that took place, which was incredibly participatory. I think that it was, in many ways, it was a social media revolution, because a lot was done through social media, and it was. I think it surprised many of us, to say the least. I think it's because I think we can all sort of sit back and say, of course, we were going to be responsive, but I think at the same time, it surprised a lot of us to see how many of us were sort of choosing to do that. But having said that, I think it's also interesting to understand why people were on the streets, because not everyone's reasons are going to be the same. And funnily enough, not everybody's reasons were to protest. A lot of people were also there because of peer pressure, and that's the honest truth of it. That's the absolute honest truth of it. There was a study, I forget, where I think I read this in the Atlantic or something, like, again, months ago. But, and of course, it referenced protests that are happening in Hong Kong also. So it was, meant to sort of understand protest behavior world over. And one of the primary reasons, not the primary reason, but one of the primary reasons which they sort of felt had motivated so much protest behavior, so to say, was because people were also bored, And the reason I'm bringing this up also is because you have to be, like, if you are going into the arena, into something like this, it is an arena. The minute you are going to be protesting, it's a serious thing, what you're trying to do, it's not just like, chalo, I posted a story and I'm done, like even posting a story, I think people don't take it. I mean, I know that there's a lot of criticism against people who do the armchair activism thing, but I think that there is something to appreciate there as well, because every action, and I'm just understanding this now, but like almost every choice, every action that we make and that we take does have politics attached to it. It is political in nature, because you're making a choice, you are presenting something. And if you don't have that conviction, if you don't know why you're doing something, then when you go in, it's always going to feel retaliatory, And if you're actually somebody who understands the why, then you will probably accept that there is value in following due process of the law. Maybe, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but you will understand that there is value in doing that by the book, And it won't be about like an eye for an eye, because, yeah.
I mean, I just feel that this entire culture that's happening around us, like, both sides are like fighting with each other every time. So it's just like we both think that we are right, and
Yeah.
we are correct, and then we're just advocating hate. We just catering
I
to
think we have a
hatred
question
anyway.
from the audience. We
Yeah.
have
Oh
Maitri.
yes.
I think
I'm so sorry, but this might have to be the last one. But
okay.
yeah,
All right.
but go ahead, please go ahead.
Yeah, this isn't exactly a question. I just wanted to add to what Manojna said as a response to Mayuk's question. It's also not about. I feel that it's also not about an eye for an eye or right wing versus left wing or whatever. There is one thing which is ideology, like your political ideology can be wherever, left, right, center, whatever. But there is also another thing that I felt the need to point it out in this discussion is what is right and wrong. I think that is also a very important thing to take into consideration. Like when we are up against an authoritarian fascist government, it's not only about right wing or left wing. It's not only about ideologies. It's not only about where we come from or what our politics is. It's about basic human rights. It's like with what we began this discussion with. It's about freedom of expression. It's about freedom of speech. So I think that is also something that we need to mention, and we need to acknowledge. It's not always about like social media is reactionary, yes, but it's not always about right wing and left wing or ideologies. It's about the good and the bad as well. And there are absolute truths, there are absolute things, and we need to stand. We need to do our research and need to stand for what is right. So yeah, that's all that I have.
Thank you so much
That's
for
beautiful.
that. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Maitri. I feel like you actually brought us back to, why we're here in this virtual room, so to say. Thank you.
Awesome. So yes, we had a lot more questions for you, but then unfortunately, time is playing its role of the villain, and the Figmila and Maravana.
Yeah.
So
I tried to keep myself in check, but I just couldn't.
no. So Manogna, we also wanted to talk about the IP theft part of it, which we never got to. There was another a barrage of questions there also. So
but I think we need an entirely separate session with
exactly.
Manogna for that. I think we'll be in touch with Manogna because this has been super enlightening. This is super insightful, and thank you so much, Manogna, for just shedding light on these.
I'm just it like I said, I don't take the opportunity to be amidst such creative folks lightly. So I'm very grateful. Thank you. Thank you, Rohan, for
Thank you, Rohan.
Thank you, Rohan. Yeah, thank you, Rohan, for
I feel like Rohan's like the superhero for the day. So
thanks for the barrage of thanks. I graciously accept.
Yeah, you just got everyone just threw them at you, of course.
So Manogna, next session में आपको पकड़ेंगे फिर से.
That sounds like a good idea for sure.
Yeah, but this time we'll have a longer one probably, and we'll So with that, I think we should end the session. Abhishek.
Yeah. Thank you everyone who joined in, who asked questions, and thanks to our esteemed guests, Rohan and Manogna. Thank you so much for giving us your time, giving us your thoughts, your insights. You guys are both amazing in what you do, and it really means a lot to us that you decided to come here today and share your knowledge with us. I'm sure there is a lot of questions that we have. There is a lot that is on our minds right now. And thank you, Manogna, for sharing the resources. But also, please do tell us, if there is an artist over here who feels the need for legal counsel, how do they reach out to you?
Of course.
And how do they connect with you?
Of course. I think the best way to sort of connect would be to write in, to send in an email, and you can do so. You can mail us at artisticlicense.org. But I think the best way to find out all of this information is to just go to the Artistic License website, and it's artistic with a K. Because that's just how I choose to spell artistic. But sure, there's that. And of course, There's Instagram. I am surprisingly happy with the little community that we have going on Artistic Licenses Instagram, and please feel free to reach out there as well. And I think happy to help, happy to be of assistance wherever possible, wherever I can, of course. And follow Green Humor.
That goes. I think we were already
I
following
think
him.
we all follow Green Humor. Yeah.
I think everyone is here through Green Humor.
Because of
Green Humor.
Yeah.
Green Humor. कुछ थोड़े last words. एक दो पंक्ति गा दो.
Manojna has this very interesting service where you can just chat with her over coffee and understand your legal woes better. So yeah, please enroll for that kind of service. She's exceptionally enlightening and delightful to talk to.
Aww.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks lastly to GAP for organizing this extremely important session. Dapun for that fantastic title panel as well.
You're welcome.
Yes.
You're welcome. And yes, and
he came up with it in like a couple of hours actually. Like he was just like by heart ka khel.
No. You don't you mean couple of minutes?
Apologies.
So anyway, thank you so much for joining us again. And guys, this will be up on our YouTube channel. So do share it as much as you can, because I think this conversation, this is the elephant in the room that we all need to talk about. And so now that we've gotten the ball rolling, so maybe we'll have more conversations like this with Manojna and Rohan, or many more lawyers to come in. So yeah, so with that, I think we should end the session. Thank you all so much for joining and all for your insightful questions. All right,
don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Yes, our channel. Yes,
and
absolutely.
wash your hands. All right, thank you so much, everyone.
Okay. And keep creating art. Yes.
Thank you, Manojna and Dapun. Thank you for hosting this session, and thank you to Rohan.
Thank you, Abhi, for co-hosting it.
Thank you for having us.
All right then. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye,
Good night.
guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.